everyone. I'm Erin McLaughlin, a Vice President at the American Council of Engineering Companies, and this is our April Economic and Private Market Update. If you like this content, please like and subscribe this page so that you can receive updates whenever we do one of these videos. So, similar to other months, I'm going to kick us off by sharing our monthly construction put in place numbers. So, these numbers include design and construction spending in the United States on a monthly basis. Our most recent numbers are for February 2022 this year. And we are comparing it to last year just to see, given the seasonality of design and construction, how we are doing compared to February of 2021. So we are up over 11% for total design and construction spending. And again, just like we've been seeing over the last couple years, this is really driven by private residential spending, particularly in the single family home market. And that is up 17% year over year. And last year it was up from the previous year. We're also seeing quite a movement in our private non-residential spending, which is great. And most likely this is because people are returning to travel, they're returning to work, they're returning to consumer spending, which drives a large part of our economy. And then lastly, it's been fairly flat, but at least it's not negative. We are seeing a small increase in our public design and construction spending. And as you all know, we do expect that to increase quite a bit as we start seeing programs and funding come from the big infrastructure bill that passed this past fall. So this chart is just, again, to show that the data points, the lines, and then again, at the bottom you see public, which is fairly flat, but it really is, of course, the private spending that drives our total spending. And right now, in the last couple years, it continues to be residential that is the main driver. So I wanted to report out a couple weeks ago here in DC was the National Association for Business Economics annual conference that focuses on policy. And they also released one of their surveys that we often look at because it has a panel with about 50 macroeconomists that report out on their thoughts and what was really the hot points of discussion and how did the survey how does that inform maybe some of the trends that are really impacting the engineering design industry. So first, let's start with monetary policy. One of our speakers was Fed Chair Jerome Powell, and he made a comment that made the headlines the next day about not feeling restricted and raising interest rates as necessary. So that is very interesting because in the survey, 77% of respondents said that they believe monetary policy is too stimulative. So basically, as you may remember, the Fed has a couple main goals, and one of them is to keep employment low, but also keep inflation in check. And so one of the ways they do that is through the interest rate and the Fed funds interest rate. So we did see it increase a quarter point last month, and we do anticipate that it will continue to go up. Now, this may result, obviously, and we've already seen it happen, in a raise in interest rates for home costs and other loans. And so that will potentially impact that design and construction spending in the future. So we'll be keeping an eye on that residential number going forward. One of the other big trends that was a hot topic of discussion, of course, was inflation in the consumer price index. In the survey, 78% of panelists said they expected inflation to stay above 3% through not only 2022, but 2023. So as we know, the Fed has a target of 2%. Whether or not that is a realistic target in this time that we're in is yet to be seen, but we are well above that right now. And so one of the other main points of discussion, of course, was the supply chain bottlenecks and the geopolitical challenges around the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we're seeing right now. 78% of panelists expected bottlenecks to worsen because of this Russia-Ukraine crisis. Now, we've heard a lot about grain and food prices and the importance of that area of the world with regards to that. And of course, that is, key to consumer spending and our economy in general. But of course, in our industry, we're also concerned about supply chain bottlenecks with regards to materials. So that's another point that we will be continuing to monitor. And lastly, which really does have quite an impact on our industry, is reduced immigration. Nearly 80% of panelists believed that reduced immigration during the pandemic has both constrained economic activity and contributed to wage pressures. And in our industry, where we have made use of H-1B visas over the years, and of course our cousins in the construction industry who also rely on quite a sizable immigrant population to do construction activities, this sort of constrained immigration pattern of the last few years, which has been aggravated by the pandemic, has created a lot of labor supply challenges. So the next slide, I just wanted to sort of show some of the latest data that we have from our federal sources. Again, consumer price index is at 7.9% for the most recent month that we have data for, which is February of 2022. And as you can see from the chart, this is a 20-year plus high. And so, I also included at the chart, all of the different factors that weigh into the consumer price index, which include energy and include gasoline, which is also a business expense for many of our firms, particularly who do a lot of field work, including surveying, geotech, that site visits, that kind of thing. So something to continue to keep in mind. And speaking of gasoline, I also thought it was really interesting that the survey included the question, what should be done to mitigate rising gas prices? And as you know, at ACEC, we have activities around making sure that the gas tax remains being collected so that we can continue to fund infrastructure. And it was a relief to see that 14% of the macroeconomists thought that lowering or suspending the gasoline tax was a good idea. But that was a pretty small number, compared to some of the other activities that macroeconomists recommend with regards to helping with our inflationary energy and gas prices. So number one was the recommended releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, turning back to employment. So our unemployment rate continues to be at near lows. For the month of March was at 3.6%. And as you can see in our chart, again, this is going back 20 years. That's a low. And it really is very interesting to think about the concept of what is full employment. And, most economists seem to think full employment is below 4%, which we are at. But for our industry in particular, the professional and related occupations, we're at about 1.6%, which is certainly full employment. So as we are still part of a booming economy, as we still look towards the future with regards to the very near future, spending connected to the infrastructure bill, finding the people to do the work remains the biggest challenge of our member firms. And as the competition is so great for people, we are seeing that wage pressure. So we don't have numbers right now that are specifically about our industry, although we are working on that. But when we just look at wages and salaries for the private sector, not the public sector, but the private sector overall, they are about 5% over last year. And so we know from some of our recent member surveys, and we're conducting some surveys right now, in looking at, what are these kinds of salary increases, what kind of impact do they have on our pricing? Because of course, when we price out jobs, especially for large public contracts, we do pricing on a multi-year basis. And so increasing at 5% or more is often not a reality for our member firms in the moment. So lastly, just a reminder that you can access our information on our private markets page on acec.org. On that page, we have all of our videos, including going back, that we're doing each month, as well as information on our private market symposiums. Our next one is at the end of April in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right next to Boston, where we're going to be talking about the healthcare and life science industries. We also have our briefs, our columns in Engineering Inc. magazine, and of course, our podcast. And with that, feel free to reach out to me for any further information you have, and thank you.